Well, it's one of those pleasant mornings as we delve into the topical discussion on the Morning Breeze. Very good morning. My name is Simon Kagwanjala, and this morning we shall be weighing in on the looming conversation. It's a debate, and the big question is what next for Ssekikubo? After expecting all the fireworks, kaboom, the Speaker of Parliament over the weekend wrote to the legislator, who is the chief petitioner, who wanted to have the 4 commissioners sacked over the 1.7 billion controversial service award. Well, the Speaker made reference to the court ruling, the Justice Singza court ruling, that declared the service award as legal. Well, we just need to give you a recap of the story as we ask what next.
This is Parliament. And even this love letter should have been delivered on in chair. She should have resumed, she should have taken the seat as the chair and constitute the House into Parliament, and then she can read her ruling, which of course we are disputing, because we are ready to show the different aspects of the motion. You can't be somewhere and you just write to the to members of Parliament. It's very unfortunate that someone is turning Parliament into a personal estate.
Our Speaker, in handling this matter, she will have to be cognizant of the fact that it is the Constitution and the rules of our rules of procedure of Parliament to guide her.
And our petition has other grounds. We are not looking at the service award alone. We are looking at issues of misconduct. What are these issues? Commissioners giving themselves illegal trips with their spouses. Somebody is going away for a trip, benchmarking trip for 30 days, which is not there in actual sense. Illegal recruitments in this Parliament, where the commissioners have their own relatives, sisters, brothers, husbands. These are all matters of misconduct. So our motion is still relevant. It must appear on the order paper. Nobody is going to fool us in this Parliament.
You cannot joke with the 186 members of Parliament who put their signatures on this motion. Because at first people thought we could not even gather 20 signatures.
You cannot do that. We are standing for our motion. We need a debate. Why is the Speaker not being neutral? Why is Anita Among not neutral? Why is she trying to take sides? If all fails, we shall take her to court.
Well, the move by the Speaker has sparked both fury and excitement on both sides. The ruling gave the commissioners a bit of relief. Honorable Matthias Mpuga, one of the key figures who was mired in this controversy, last week made a comment expressing pleasure at the ruling. But well, a number of legislators have also come out to give their mixed reactions to the decision by the Speaker of Parliament. Could this be a final blow to Ssekikubo's petition? Apparently, there are also legislators who have written withdrawing their signatures and asking to take leave of the whole subject. So, does this mean that the Ssekikubo petition has now reached its climax, and an ugly one at that? The fireworks that were never. Quite an interesting conversation. We expect Honorable Theodore Ssekikubo to be joining us during the course of the show, and we also expect Honorable Tinka Simire, one of the outspoken legislators who was widely expected to append his signature onto the petition, but he didn't. Well, there is a big debate now on whether the MPs naively went into appending their signatures onto this petition, well knowing that the service award went through normal procedure. That's also another controversial question that remains unanswered. Well, did Ugandans miss out on the opportunity to examine the way Parliament works? Could it be another way? Could the Speaker have denied Ugandans an opportunity to see or check the alertness of their legislators? Could legislators have played oversight on this matter, the legislators who appended their signatures? And what could have influenced the enthusiasm or the ambivalence of some legislators towards the motion as it now suffers a dead end? Could it be over, game over, or Sechikubo can still pursue other avenues to ensure that this matter gets onto the floor of Parliament? That and much more will inform our discussion, and we hope to be joined by the two seasoned legislators to share their opinion. For now, let's take a very short breather and we'll be back.
Exciting news for news lovers. The Now Post, your reliable source of swift and accurate news, has introduced its all-new mobile-friendly experience. We have upgraded your mobile news experience, giving you a slick, user-friendly interface, making it easier than ever to stay informed. Embark on a new era of news exploration with Now Post, scrolling through with ease because it's seamless and lighter. Now Post, accurate news, fast.
What is our promise to you? The responsibility that we have upheld for the last decade? The commitment to you has always been to bring you the stories that matter to you, the stories behind the headlines. At Live at 9, we bring you in-depth analysis and a 360-degree perspective to every story. We make sure that we are the voice to the voiceless. In a world where truth and facts have become hard to detect, we remain true to our dedication to bring you the unbiased and varnished, balanced and untainted truth behind every story. From breaking news to probing investigations and in-studio interviews, we keep you informed of the pulse of Uganda and the world.
One by one makes a bando. United Media is your gateway to a countrywide radio station. With a coalition of more than 120 radio stations, 15 TV channels, 20 online publications, you can cover every region and community with convenience and no hassle. Guaranteed impact with consolidated communication and localized engagement. Whether it's an MDA, development partner, FMCG or regular advertiser, United Media is a truly one-stop shop for your communication needs. United Media, together we will shape the future.
So we shall use that to now agree as Parliament as how we do our business. Probably it offers education to members of Parliament that neglect their duty and then want to appeal to the public through incitement and other forms of excitement on their own. Also, to note that probably this will put the petitioners in the rightful space. People have been asking why I have been personally quiet and left matters to take their course. It's because I believe in the rule of law. If people are petitioning, they have right to petition. If people go to court, they have right to go to court. And all these different agencies of government have a right to take a decision. Today we obtained one of the key decisions. I am sure it is going to impact probably other possible decisions that we will obtain from that ruling. So we shall use that to now agree as Parliament as how we do our business. Probably it offers education to members of Parliament that neglect their duty and then want to appeal to the public.
Since 16th August 2024, the Speaker of Parliament, Anita Among, has written to the censure motion petitioner, Theodore Sitchkubo, informing him of how his motion has suffered a stillbirth following a court decision that exonerated the commissioners, implicating the clerk to Parliament. The Speaker indicates that the court ruling addressed all their worries. However, shortly after receiving the letter, the lead petitioner, Theodore Sitchkubo, has spoken out asking the Speaker to follow the rules of procedure.
Of course, the letters communicate the intention of the writer, of the communicator. But if we wanted to, we would equally have been writing letters. But the rules provide with a procedure to follow. A motion isn't disposed by letters. No. A motion is deliberated and concluded in one way or the other.
Sitchkubo emphasizes that they cannot go by the letters to handle a matter of national and public importance, arguing that this matter should be dealt with on the floor of Parliament.
And the Speaker, the rules, she's the custodian of the rules. Whether she chooses to misdirect herself or she continues to guide well the House, that will be a matter to be determined.
While the Speaker quoted a constitutional court ruling by Justice Mulangira, stressing the matter cannot find its way to the floor of Parliament, Sitchkubo indicates that the law guides on this matter.
Whether by the ruling of court, Parliament lost or was ousted in its oversight function, whether the ruling meant ousting Parliament and its mandate to move and discipline its own members.
Earlier, the Speaker of Parliament, Anita Among, was accused by the petitioners of calling and threatening individuals who had appended their signatures to the censure motion. In a letter dated 16th August 2024, the Speaker of Parliament, Anita Among, has written to the censure motion.
Well, a very interesting development that prompts a new debate now. Where does the Speaker's decision leave Parliament? Well, in the wake of the court ruling, the Brete court ruling, Brete applied to court, praying that the service award be declared illegal. Court declared it legal. Well, Honorable Barnabas Tinkasimi, Member of Parliament from Buyaga, joins us this morning. Good to have you and a very good morning.
Good morning, Kagwanjana, and to our viewers, particularly those from my constituency, good morning. Buyaga West and the Kagadi District, Bunyoro Sub-Region.
It took me aback to realize that you had actually not signed. I thought Sitchkubo, being your colleague for years, would persuade you into appending a signature onto the petition.
When he addressed the press conference, we had not caucused. And the matter that he was raising, though critical, I felt there are a number of issues that had been left out. And I tried to convince him that we bring all of them on board. He said, for me, I am only interested in the commissioners. Again, I told him, yes, you are interested in the commissioners. But do you realize that this equally touches other persons who belong to the commission, like the leader of opposition, the leader of government business, the speaker, and the minister for finance? Because they sit, and the deputy speaker, they sit on the commission.
Yes.
They are members of the commission. So when you're impeaching the backbench commissioners, they say that these belong to us. I told him we have raised a red flag against the corrupt. And I have a number of issues, like recently they reported about two ministers, Minister Lugorobi and the Minister for Agriculture for Crops. using their children, their daughters' company to sell a forest in Kayunga, and they scooped a cool 8 billion and they ran away with it. I told him we needed to include this. There are a number of other corruption scandals. I said the minister who sold rats, each rat at 8 million, needs to be included on the list. This is what our argument. Before we even started collecting the signatures, I had a very, very long discussion with him. A very, very long discussion with him. I said, if you concentrate on the budget of Parliament, remember budget, in the last financial year, the budget of Parliament was allocated 1 trillion. You are leaving the misuse of public resources in the 47 trillion. Last financial we had 48 trillion. I said we need to also focus at the corrupt in the budget of the 47 trillion. You know that there is a lot of money being lost in the area of classified expenditure, in the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Works, so many ministries. A lot of monies are being lost. We need to follow it up. You know, I asked him, you know what happened?
You want to suggest it was more selective and redundant?
No. I told him you are targeting a soft target. You cannot follow only 1.8 billion, 1.7 billion, when they are fleecing you of over 10 trillion. Let's at least do something, at least comprehensively.
So if he had cast his net wide,
yes,
you'd have gone.
I would have signed. He did not convince me that I needed to sign only for the commissioners.
Yeah, he was able to pull it off with 189 signatures.
He did, but now you can see where we have gone. I even remember telling him about this, because I had heard about it, telling him about this case. He said, that one does not affect me. I told him, you are using a different rule to collect the signatures, not the one that requires you to inform the speaker, then you spend 14 days collecting the signatures. So entirely your process has not started. The other people's process of going to court has started. When you move your process, they will shoot you down using the sub judice rule. I told him about it. He said, okay, we shall we shall cross the river, the bridge when we reach the bridge. I said, most obliged. He's my senior, and he has been
a colleague.
He has been in the House for the last. When we finish this term, it will be 25 years. 25 years. He's my very great friend. We met when we were in a single for cadreship training, Cadre 27. Me and him. We joined the Makerere in the same year. He was in University Hall, I was in Mitchell Hall. We were very close friends. Even when we are after university working, we are very, very close. He is one of the people who talked me into joining Parliament. Joining Parliament. And up to this time, we are good, very, very good friends.
Okay.
When he handles a matter, he's very, very resilient. You get me?
Did you find the way he handled this matter shabby and shameful?
Well, he did his part.
Or vindictive in a way?
He did his part. And now, of course, members of Parliament, like the ones who had tried to now start withdrawing signatures. Withdrawal of signatures is against our rules. Now they are feeling a big sigh of relief. Oh, God is great for helping us to overcome this problem. Where would we have, how would we have faced the House?
No, I thought MPs voluntarily appended their signatures.
But you are aware that some of them started saying they were duped. And indeed, when you look at the entire process, I think in some circumstances, he exerted some undue pressure. When you exert pressure on a person, he also knows that is against the law. Any form of pressure on a person, whether he signs voluntarily.
So there was coercion to an
Because
extent.
if you corner somebody at his home, you corner somebody, because one time they brought those things into my car to sign, and they would parade the journalists. If you are not a sober person, you will end up signing because you don't want to feel embarrassed before the journalists, and that was not good. That was not good, and next time he will do better. I know he's good. I have asked him. We have fought very many wars. I want you to put serious emphasis. He knows the agenda we are on is not just this thing of collecting signatures. Ugandans are suffering for the last 48 years. For a very long period of time. NRM has been in charge of this country. We have failed to transform the ordinary person. Our agenda is to make sure that every Ugandan has a capacity to have a decent house. Every Ugandan has a capacity to afford 3 meals in a day.
Okay.
Every Ugandan has a capacity to pay fees for all the children he or she produces
Okay. Do
in the household.
you want to embolden the argument that there was more of politicking than the pursuit of corruption?
For me, that is why I did not sign. You are not going to tell Ugandans that I have killed people who misused 1.7 trillion. Billion. And you are the one who misused the 10 trillion are at large. And when you had the opportunity.
Okay, if we go by the ruling, the court judgment, the judge asserts that this process went through due procedure in Parliament. Was this matter ever discussed in Parliament?
Previously, I have submitted on this platform and other platforms that the issue of the parliamentary commission budget, there is a law which provides that statutory bodies, when they bring their budgets, shall be passed as they are. We, particularly on the floor of the House, we believe that these statutory committees, statutory bodies, their budgets have gone to various committees. And Parliament, members of Parliament have that confidence that any critical question was raised in the committee. And for this statutory the parliamentary commission, their budget went to the legal committee. So all members of Parliament knew critical questions, critical eyes were put during the process when they were in the committee. On the floor of the House.
So there was due process?
Certainly. Coming on other platforms, and you say there was no due process, the budget was passed. The only way they would actually have returned, the best way, would have been to move a motion to say this was a wasteful expenditure, although it was passed by Parliament. We want to move a motion that this budget item be revised through environment reallocation. We reallocate this money to something very critical other than service awards. Service awards. And that motion, I would have signed. It would have carried the day because it is within the procedure of the members of Parliament. And many members of Parliament would be convinced without even
the decision.
I have never seen, we have handled very many things. I have never seen Honorable Theodore Sechikubo asking us to move to regions. The time we were moved from NRM, do you know that we had a serious matter that led us to be expelled from NRM? We were pushing the health budget to be increased. In this country, I want to tell you that if it was that agenda that we had taken to them, I'm telling you, they would even riot. They would even riot. But the rioting over commissioners who are their representatives,
you seem
they
to
would
depict
not.
it as a very petty issue where yet Sechikubo invested a lot of time, a lot of energy.
I have never seen him do such. And
petty?
that's
Was
why,
it petty?
in one way or the other, he became an item of suspect. Because he has never done it. He has never done it. He has never done it. Going to regions, if we all this energy he put in this thing, he had been putting it in the affairs we have been handling. I am sure by this time, if he would not be head of state, he would be the vice president or the prime minister of this country.
There is a sense that Parliament is now divided. There is a huge rift in Parliament in the wake of the signing and the non-signing. There is a block of the 189.
I can assure you that members of Parliament, the court has saved them. Very many of them are feeling a sigh of relief. I want to give you an example. There is one from Bunyoro. I will not even hesitate to mention him here. Pius Wakabe had intimated to me that he is not going to sign. But because they went to the region, he had to sign. He knows very well that the Right Honorable Speaker is the one who moved that we get a supplementary budget for the Hoima Stadium. For the Hoima Stadium. And anything which touches the Speaker in that way, he said, I will die protecting this woman. Now, because now we must be saying, God is very good.
So you want to suggest that some MPs were
and I am sure on the
signing
and
for
I'm
their
sure
political
on the floor
safety.
On the floor of the house, on the floor of the house, very many were not going to turn up to those who signed. They were not going to turn up to sign. They would forge. I am sick.
Isn't it exposing the kind of dishonesty that
But
defines politics?
This honesty has been in the Parliament, you know it, where members of Parliament will be shown, other than this case, I am not saying, and I don't want to say that he paid out any person, but at least for the influence, the pressure he experienced it, I have evidence of it. I have evidence of it. If the pressure that was put on me to sign is the same pressure that was put on other members of Parliament, then the process was not fair. Was not fair. But the dishonesty you're trying to talk about, certainly members of Parliament, the biggest number, when it comes to issues like this one, you will say they are dishonest, but they have an agenda. They want to return to the next house. Others signed for the Mawulire people.
Well, there is also a school of thought that Bwete, who petitioned the court, is a proxy of the commissioners.
I am not aware, but for me,
what if
I will take a ruling of court to be a serious ruling? You know, I am an officer of court, and I cannot turn here, particularly on a serious public media platform, and start
demonizing,
derogating from the principle that court decision is final. If you have anything, you can only appeal against it. And I even remember discussing this matter with my very good senior, Theodore Sechkubo, that please, if this matter, somebody is taking it to court, get interested to know who are these persons. Who are these persons? Such that you apply to join the application. You become a part of it. Because if they go ahead and make a decision where you are not, these people will sit back. For you, if you have interest, you will even appeal.
You seem to suggest that this is fait accompli, yet I've heard Honorable Sechkubo vowing to push on regardless.
No, you can also go to court. You can also go to court, but of course it will be just for political reasons. He can raise other grounds and go to court. But to say that Parliament will discuss a matter that has been judged by by Parliament.
In
by
whose
court.
interest is the Speaker
will not.
working?
It is against our rules.
No, in whose interest is the Speaker working? Because there is a general public sentiment out there that was baying for the blood of the 4 commissioners.
You know, even if she would be working to save her commissioners, the rules are on her side. The Constitution says Parliament shall not make any law to reverse the decision of court, the judgment of court. In other words, we are completely barred to discuss a matter that has been decided on by court, by court. And he also knows there is a principle of res judicata. Matters that have been decided on by court or decided on, you leave them to, they are gone. They are gone. The only way that you can reopen such a matter, the exceptional rule to that, is an appeal. And he cannot come up today and say, I am going to appeal. Appeal, he's not party to...
Are you alive to the sentiment out there in the public that the Speaker is shielding the corrupt in Parliament?
I am aware people are, of course, they have...
The anger.
They have painted the Parliament, even MPs, by the way. They have painted Parliament, including members of Parliament, that we are thieves. That's
and
why...
Seth Kubo is a hero as we speak.
Of course, he fought for it. He fought for it.
He's a hero.
In the public eyes. But when they also get to understand him, because if you pass a budget, you are a member of Parliament, you pass a budget. Then as the accounting officer is implementing it, then you turn against the institution, then you are dishonest. Do you get me?
Okay. Do we judge MPs as being dishonest or naive
in
this case, in this particular case?
No, if naivety means what?
Naive that they were not even able to refer to the process under which this money was processed.
It is negligence, not naivety. It is negligence. Because, let me tell you, none of those people who participated in the moving of this motion can be described to be people who are academic infidels. They are excellent people. I have handled matters with my senior Theodore Seth Kubo. He's very thorough. He's very thorough. Why? Because at this particular time, after this matter had jumped off his mind, because he participated in passing it on the floor of the House, he should have left it. Because now it is exposing him as a person, when it comes to matters of Parliament, he minds about other things. He is only waking up to play politics, because this is purely politics. Like now, these regional sittings, what do you expect? You have given Parliament a budget. You have passed it through an appropriation act. What do you expect them to do? Now they are coming up that instead of us holding regional sittings, use this money to I met somebody yesterday in the bank, was saying, we do not have money for the new curriculum for A-level. He's not even aware that we discussed this matter for the new curriculum on the floor of the House. A minister presented a statement and said they are not ready to go to A-level. They want to first experiment O-level. But they are saying, use, in the public eyes, they are saying we are going to use in each regional sitting 15 billion, not 3 billion. Not 3 billion. Not 3 billion. Why can't you use the 15 billion? You can see when you start such things, what you bring. You cause confusion. This is confusion now in the public eyes. So if a public is confused and is aware that we are going to use 15 billion in Gulu, 15 billion in Masaka, 15 billion in Mbale, 15 billion in Mbarara, they will run mad. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money. But it is your MPs who passed the same, who are now opening a discussion on a matter that they already decided on.
Okay. Has the tension that this petition had brought to Parliament subsided?
I have told you, MPs are feeling a high sigh of relief. Who had signed? You saw the press conference which they held. I think, was it yesterday or the other day? How many MPs turned up? If it was a popular show, or at least 50 MPs, or even 20, or even 10, who signed would turn up and say,
there are now two blocks of legislators, the pro-people and the anti-people.
No, don't divide the parliament like that. All of us are pro-people. Me, I am actually pro-poor. In the house, I am known as a pro-poor person. They are those ones who are pro-rich. Those ones who join the cabinet, we label them pro-rich. They no longer work for the ordinary person. That's why you will see a minister joining cabinet who was on foot. I am talking on foot, using the ordinary. In a very short time, he will be talking in arcades, in and he will live in another world. He will start going to Dubai to buy buildings, things like that. Things like that. We want, the person we say is pro-poor is that one who is persistently concerned about the welfare of the ordinary person. This person whose child at the end of this term is not taking his report at home because he did not complete fees, or who did not do the exams. This is the person we would say he's pro-poor. He is pro-poor, is pro-people.
Well, where we are now, while the censure motion had, the petition had attracted everyone's attention, Ssekikubo and group are threatening to go all the way in pushing that this matter returns to Parliament. Do you think legislators are still as enthusiastic as they were?
Of course, they will have audience on the floor of the House. They will make their case. But the presiding officer, I don't think I will give them audience after having this ruling.
Well, we'll be speaking to Honorable Theodore Ssekikubo, who's now joined us in the studio. And of course, as we take a break, good morning, Honorable.
Morning.
Welcome back. It's still the topical discussion as we analyze the fate of Ssekikubo's petition. The censure bid, as we speak, hit a snag following a letter from the Speaker blocking any kind of discussion on this matter on the floor of Parliament. Well, Honorable, the architect of this petition, how are you coping with the flop?
Thank you once again. To me and to my colleagues, the petitioners, we don't take it as a flop. We suffered some jolt.
A huge setback.
No. Some jolt, because ordinarily we would expect the Speaker, who is the custodian of the rules, to give justice to our motion. It was not enough to conclude the motion on the question of service award. The motion had some other legs, you may call them limbs, one of which was the service award. And indeed, rightly or wrongly, court pronounced itself. And it's not our intention to contest court. It's not our purpose to contest court. Let it be on the question of service award. But we had other matters that we thought would be able to debate. You can sever the service award from the motion, but other grounds still stand, like on the unconscionable expenditures of Parliament, like an issue on the fictitious trips. like an issue on members' wish to have the Parliamentary Commission elect its leadership. We know their term was 2.5 years. And the Administration of Parliamentary Act of the Administration of Parliament Act stipulates 2.5 years. In our motion, we were desirous to press it on the House to ensure that we elect.
But key was the censure of these legislators.
Key is your word. The motion has grounds, and it underpins those grounds. And for us, we moved under misconduct. It is misconduct. Like taking, for instance, of these fictitious trips with spouses, 30 days, then they go back for 30 days, and other unconscionable expenditures from the Parliamentary Commission. So we thought this motion would enable us to streamline all those concerns. Service award was one amongst those.
Do you imagine Bwete's zeal to declare the service award illegal was in good faith?
No, it wasn't in good faith, because when we learned of the ruling, we rushed to court. And indeed, records at court, the court proceedings, show that Bwete, the aggrieved party, the aggrieved person, the plaintiff, you may call the complainant, Bwete Daniel, never stepped even for a single time in court.
But he was represented by lawyers.
I take it. But a person who is very much aggrieved, there were no witnesses in that case, in the trial. There was no evidence. The evidence they had was the service award. No much evidence. We, the petitioners, had evidence. And indeed, we have our evidence. We would be the most credible witnesses if at all it had been brought to our attention that there is a matter. It was totally handled in secrecy, under the table. Because after a hush, the judge went back to write his judgment.
In haste, right?
Because we were still counting the 14 days, and they had to make sure that a ruling was ready before the 14 days. And to us, we find that it was meant to upstage the motion. We don't take it kindly. We are looking at the conspiracy, because now the judgment is over. But we are looking at the circumstances under which this matter was prosecuted, where the commissioner will still put it to them that they're the ones who created the so-called Bwete Daniel.
Does the Speaker's decision depict her as someone who is shielding the corrupt?
We are extremely puzzled by the conduct of the Speaker. Extremely puzzled. And indeed, we have brought it to her attention. We have shown her the paragraphs. Whereas paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4 can be attributed to the service award. But look at paragraph 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. They are raising different grounds. The question of res judicata as raised in the Speaker's letter, we say this cannot apply, because our intention is not to put the question of service award back to try to examine it on its merits. We have left that to court. So we are not turning ourselves into some judicial body, Parliament. We are not a court of law to say that once a matter has been determined by a competent court, we intend to open it again for scrutiny. We are saying no. We are leaving that matter aside, but please look at these other issues that were not canvassed and determined by court.
We gather you are amending the motion.
Our intention...
to reintroduce it, but you're using the same signatures.
No. We are not about to reintroduce a motion, no. Because that would, we are alive to the fact that doing that would require you going back to seek for signatures. Why? We can't litigate forever. We can't be in petition and censure forever. We feel that Yes, go ahead, the same signatures, the same motion, but with different grounds. You can take off one ground, his land friend, Honorable Barnabas Tekasimiri. You can sever off one ground, but the other grounds still stand. They are still competent and well ingrained in our motion.
The speaker has already expressed her indifference to the whole business. Why don't you just give it up?
No, what we are saying is that the speaker is also a member of parliament. He's one among equals, but he's now our boss. He's the head of that institution called the parliament. Number two, she is the custodian of the rules. And she should therefore interpret those rules judiciously. And this does not even require interpretation. This would require her to do the right thing. Because we have petitioned her. She should stand neutral. At least she should appear to be neutral. She shouldn't take her personal views.
Okay. Do you take
and that's what we are
telling.
telling.
Do you take it that you have lost on the first round?
We have not lost. We are delayed. We are being delayed, but we have not lost.
Honorable Tinka, do you imagine that Sechikubo has lost round one?
No, he's here. He has told he has not lost. But what he's saying, building from what he's saying, that if he would be allowed that he proceeds, which is most likely not to happen, he would amend and introduce, amend and go with other grounds. For me, when members were signing, we are largely signing to censure the commissioners because of the service award. When it goes off, his motion becomes a weak motion to persuade the members to pursue the motion on the floor of the House. And this becomes very difficult when it comes now to raising those who will vote.
Some MPs have already started applying to withdraw their signatures. What does that mean?
No. Here, the applications of those will be massive because after removing the service award,
the appetite will go?
Yes. The other thing that now why the speaker cannot allow, those grounds he's talking about have evidence against her husband, which were not formally part of why MPs were signing.
So it will be a new kind of grounds.
And he's aware that I happened to get the original copy of the petition, of the motion that he raised to the speaker. I read through it. By God's chance, I think he forgot. When he was submitting evidence, he submitted evidence, a piece of evidence against the trips he's talking about. One of them was the trip which was done by the spouse. The spouse of the speaker, who is Magogo. Where I fault him, why he deliberately decided to use the evidence of one person, of one spouse. He also knows that the deputy speaker travels. He knows that the deputy speaker many times also travels with his wife. I did not see any evidence you brought touching the wife of the deputy speaker.
So you think it's a bit personal?
That's why this motion will die immediately. They will call him a sergeant. I am telling you. You are going
Do you really consider his pessimism?
First of all.
No. I am telling you. Other grounds which is going to rely on.
Fine. Let's
which is going to rely on. They're even more dangerous.
Okay, fine.
Than the service award. The service award, the speaker did not receive.
As it takes a new twist, Tinker comes in with a dose of pessimism.
But first of all, I wanted to correct the impression. and you know, I wouldn't have been the one to stand opposite him. I wish you had brought me some other guru, but him, I have no energy to fight him. But having said but having said that,
This is your show.
but having said that,
The two rebels.
it is, yeah, you wouldn't have done this to us. But having said that, not only Honorable Magogo, whereas probably he emerges as a spouse to the Speaker, but he's a member of Parliament. He can be faulted in his own personal capacity. I believe so. He's a member. We all took oath as members of Parliament. He's like one of us. And what we are saying, what justification can he have to take 30 days, then after 30 days, then another 30 days, then another 30 days, paid for by Parliamentary Commission? But we do not look at Honorable Magogo alone.
He's a spouse. And a budget provides for the Speaker, the Deputy Speaker to move with their spouses.
But 30 days and another 30 days and
Yes.
consecutive 30 days?
Yes.
Consecutive 30 days?
No, it's
and
catered
being
for in the
paid.
budget.
Question
Isn't
the
it?
accounting
It's not.
officer. The
Isn't
accounting
it-
officer.
isn't it
by the
budgeted
way, for
for?
the record,
That is an abuse.
his term has been renewed.
That's an abuse. Number two, we looked, the evidence we supplied was about other commissioners. Honorable Esther Foyochan, Honorable Professor Kampulira, and others whose spouses are not even members of Parliament. But they are being paid Parliamentary
So you're
Commission
making a case
allowances.
for a new motion now.
Not a new motion. He's drawing me into saying which justification do you have? And we are saying...
You're striking off the first ground and then going for other grounds, right?
Of course, in the wisdom of the Speaker, as she wrote, she put pen to paper. And of course, that one we fault. The Speaker can only constitute Parliament when she's in the chair. She can give a ruling, not a mere picking of a pen and paper and writing. Because now this was a parliamentary process. A parliamentary process has its own procedures and how it is determined. And this is usually on the floor of Parliament. You don't pick pen to paper and you write to a member of Parliament and write a petition.
It took you 3 months to gather signatures for the censure of commissioners. This time,
we are alive
do you
to
have a
that.
timeline in mind?
We are alive to that. But the processes involved in there, we are not the normal processes. Convince members of Parliament.
Hijack them sometimes.
No. To convince members of Parliament.
was saying that he was stampeded when he was even in the car.
No. Of course, Honorable Barnabas.
Respectively,
Honorable Barnabas, when he says that I stampeded him, that when the petitioners stampeded him, I have no comment. I have no comment. Probably he was busy
You
with other
used
issues.
every crude mean to get signatures,
I
including going to people's homes, traveling up country for signatures.
No. People were inviting us. I tell you, people were inviting us because it was a deliberate effort.
intimidation.
It was a deliberate effort to scuttle the effort of soliciting for signatures, because Parliament was sent on endless recess, and the endless recess meant that members were up country. Most members were up country. Indeed, there are those who invited us, but along the way, we sought to interact with our colleagues. Look at it this way: where members of Parliament who are doing a matter provided for under the rules can be frustrated this far, where even those who have appended their signatures, they are being enticed, coerced into withdrawing the signatures, yet he's aware that once you append your signatures, you can't withdraw the signatures. When members are being stopped from exercising their rightful duty, let me tell you
And
this.
some members are saying they were hoodwinked into
Let me
signing.
tell you this. Members of Parliament must be respected. What makes you think that members of Parliament don't understand? That they support a motion and tomorrow they say they were hoodwinked. Why are you playing bad games with members of Parliament? Because these are people's representatives with dignity, with full knowledge and intention to help this country.
The motion in Parliament is not personal. We are only making a humble contribution to this country. Because the moment the People's Parliament dies, you have no country.
Okay, there's now 2 blocks in a parliament. We're looking at the 189 who were persuaded and appended their signatures.
There are actually 180.
We're looking at
180.
No. What we can do?
We're looking at
let
over
Honorable
340.
Let Honorable Barnabas, he has no locus to comment and be an authority amongst those who signed, because he was not part of those who signed.
How do you get at that figure?
He wasn't part.
When, you know, I have told you, I looked at the original copy of the petition he presented. For instance, there is a page where he signed and he signed again.
A moment.
On the same. He signed it 2 times.
A moment.
And it is counted
Mr.
among
Kagwanja.
the 189.
Mr. Kagwanja.
There is another MP who also signed 2 times. Actually, there are 3 MPs who signed 2 times.
Kagwa.
3 MPs.
Yes.
So the validity of signatures is also questionable.
No, they are valid because what you do is remove.
The numerals are questionable.
Yes, it is only the numerals, but they raised the required signatures.
No, I'm really let down. Honorable Barnabas, at least he served once as a chairperson of a committee, Presidential Affairs Committee. But he is neither a commissioner, he's neither deputy speaker, and he can't purport to be the speaker. Why is he informally handling our motion in a casual manner?
Okay. But you know,
I'm afraid.
How is he credible to say, where you addressed this motion, was this motion addressed to you? Why are you playing with matters of public importance like this?
At the end of the day, we are going to, because this thing has displayed that members of parliament, we are not taking keen interest in what is happening on the front of the house.
Barnabas, you don't work in the speaker's office. You are not in the speaker's chambers.
But I can ask for information.
You are not in the speaker's chambers.
How
are you informally handling matters of such great public importance and casually like the way you are doing?
Am I telling lies?
Yes, you are not telling the truth. It's not the truth.
Can we ask next time, invite both of us, I carry the original? Because I will get...
But how would you be addressed with the original?
I will access it.
As who?
Is it a secret document?
But as who? No. There is a formal way such matters are handled.
No, but is it a secret document?
It isn't, but as of for now...
So he got access to
the procedure, the motion is with the speaker. How did the Right Honourable Speaker come to share it with him?
Am I not
to
aware
go
that
popularizing it?
The motion?
Now you see
how we go wrong.
Well, gentlemen,
is this how we handle matters of public importance?
I am aware.
Matters of parliament are casually shared.
I am aware that
matters of parliament are shared.
And I can go there and ask.
They are shared.
This is what happened.
Is this how you handle parliamentary business? Is this how the speaker handles the parliamentary business? And you say this is the right way? We should be handling parliamentary business?
That's it from us. Have a lovely day and cheers.
NBS happening now.
The next 9 nations do in terms of their spending on an industrial base. It gives you a sense of where the more powerful and potent medium to long-term economic multiplier is going to be. And it's certainly in the West, less in the West and more in the East. In terms of democratic and ideological tendencies, we're seeing lessening affiliation with democracy. In fact, democratic nations peaked in the mid to late 1990s. We're seeing a drift towards greater levels of illiberalism, a greater level of intolerance, a greater levels of xenophobic tendencies in a variety of nations, a relative lack of accommodation of contrasting views. And this illiberalism seems to be taking place in an era where we have big men leaders, heightening levels of populism. When I say big men leaders, consider Xi Jinping, leader for life, potentially, in China. In Russia, Mr. Putin, President Putin, likely to be in office until the mid-30s. You've got a strongman leader in Viktor Orban in Hungary. Similarly, Erdogan in Turkey, and maybe the emergence of Donald Trump in the United States in his second reincarnation. So big men which offer populist projections and policies to their citizens that may not necessarily be enduring, and greater levels of intolerism, greater levels of illiberalism. As I've said, the World Wide Web defined the last 30 years, but the World Wide Web is largely reaching maturity. We think that there's likely to be less impetus from the Internet of Things to drive growth. Instead, the combination of artificial intelligence, quantum computing, the metaverse, and also immersive reality technologies. We are witnessing a lurch into the unknown, an accelerating race into a technological unknown. We don't know precisely what the future is going to look like in terms of technological disruption, but we do know it's coming to us quicker than we ever imagined. It is possible that the next 5 years of technological evolution will be equivalent to the past 25 years of technological evolution. In other words, exponential speed with new tech that we are going to have to embrace, which both presents angst, but enormous opportunity, particularly for African nations that can leapfrog the more traditional bricks and mortar, the more traditional types of technological foundations. In resources, we're shifting from abundance to scarcity. Not just scarcity, for example, with regard to rare earth metals or the technologies needed for renewable energy, but also food scarcity. And that is partly why we've seen food inflation so heavy in many markets, so elevated in many markets. And of course, climatic challenge is also threatening food production and food security. We're shifting from dirty energy to clean energy. In a 100-year episode in terms of structural change, in terms of energy drive, the shift from carbon-based to renewable energy, as I've suggested, for the first time in 100 years, a seismic level of new amount of investment and new adoption of technologies with regard to lessening the global carbon footprint. An immense opportunity, both in terms of investment and an opportunity for bringing energy to markets that have been bereft of energy, particularly on the continent. We're shifting from an era of big wars. I did not want to write small wars so as to diminish and make light of death, even during smaller conflicts. But tension, as we've seen in terms of a Cold War tension between West and versus East, between continued attempts at modern-day, Latin-day colonialism in certain markets of Western hegemony and Western military strength attempting to assert itself across the world is part of it. And it ties to the confrontational stance in the very first point that I made. Over the last couple of years, we've seen ideological drift towards what some people will call wokeism. Very left-leaning ideologies permeating society. But now there's a retreat. There is a resistance, a more conservative voice beginning to emerge against woke ideals. In fact, some would say that Trump's popularity, even if he wins or doesn't win the United States elections, his popularity is because he appeals to a conservative American base who are still rooted in conservative ideals and are threatened or feeling angst with regard to this more liberal wokeism that has been thrust upon society in recent years. But that, as I said, was my first introduction, and I'll be a little bit more hasty now. was just to give you some sense of the more structural, epoch-inviting, era-inviting changes. It's bigger than just talking about cyclical growth. The second chapter, and here I'll be quick. I just wanted to show you some images of the continent that perhaps you've not seen, and they present a few interesting insights. This is Africa in terms of population density. In other words, where do we reside as Africans in terms of people per square kilometer? You can see very much North Africa, the lighter shades, the reddish to orange shades where people are populated. You can see the density along the Nile, an almost whitish image showing you the density and the proximity to water bodies. From the lower parts of the Sahara, Senegal, all across Ghana, Nigeria, Guinea, up until Cameroon, and then sort of in an arc shape, East Africa, down to the southern parts, the southeastern parts of South Africa, and even a density in Madagascar. I describe our distribution almost like an arc. An arc, as I said, from western continental Africa in an arc shape all the way down to the southeastern part of South Africa. And I want you to just kind of cling to that notion of an arc in terms of our population distribution on our continent. You can see across the Sahara and the lower part of the Sahara, the Sahel, quite shallow in terms of population, obviously, because of its dryness, its intense heat. So we're drawn to bodies of water, either lakes or to coastal cities. This is rainfall. The dark blue area shows where there's more rain, sort of more abundant rain, and the lighter shades of the image show you where there's lesser rain. Now, I know if I were to say Kenya, Tanzania, and sometimes Uganda tends to be a lesser rainfall area, you would challenge me, especially given the abundant rainfall in certain parts of East Africa earlier this year. But relatively speaking, you can see far more dense rain. Cameroon, Congo, the DRC, and also Guinea and those areas. But you can see there's another almost arc shape in terms of lighter rainfall in this particular image. It's interesting if you look at the African dispersion of forests. Forests are more heavily located where there's more rain. So the lighter area on this exhibit shows you where more dense forests, more dense production of oxygen, and lighter, relatively lighter levels of forests in that arc where there's less rainfall. And note, it's also where population density is more heavily distributed. This is an image of croplands. We grow crops where we reside. That arc image of population density is more or less mimicked in this image. And notice there's a little bit of a contradiction in the sense that we reside near bodies of water, terrain, terrestrial water and oceans, but we're also growing our crops where there is less rainfall, relatively speaking. And that also speaks to the precariousness of our croplands, the dependence on rainfall for irrigation, and especially the dependence when we know that 90% of African agriculture is rainfall dependent. Put quite simply, we reside where there's less rainfall, relatively speaking. We grow our crops more greatly dependent on rainfall and precarious rainfall, and it speaks to the vulnerability of our rainfall. The next image I'm showing you relates to livestock dependency. I hope you can still see me because for some reason my screen has faded, and I'm sure someone will just tell me through Teams if it's all good, because I think I've struggled for a moment, but I hope you can still see me. Okay, all good. So what I'm showing you is livestock dependency. Thank you for that all good message. What you're seeing now is livestock dependency. and it's just in a sense mimicking the agricultural or the earlier exhibit. You're coming to near conclusion. This exhibit you're looking at now is shipping lines, and it just shows you the shipping lines which envelope the continent. A fair amount of shipping lines that passes through the southern part of South Africa, or the Cape of Storms, as we call it. But you can see the very light images on North Africa. So the Gulf of Aden, the Suez Canal, the Mediterranean, the astonishing level of transportation lines that provide shipment from west to east, from the United Kingdom to India and further on, for that matter. Of course, because of the inflamed tensions in the Middle East, we've seen an increase in shipments passing through Southern Africa. In fact, during the first half of this year, and especially the first quarter of 2024, shipping movement, container shipping movement, passing the southern parts of Africa increased by up to 50% for obvious security and safety reasons. This is carbon emissions, and it mimics the population density image. In other words, carbon emissions are where we reside. The streaks that you see across the Sahara Desert, the Sahel, that just gives you some sense of airline traffic and the carbon emissions distributed in that respect, which, as we know, tends to be quite heavy. Let me turn very quickly to the third element I wanted to visit with you, and this relates to external trade. Now, with respect to external trade, what we're looking at here is just simply imports as a proportion of GDP. If you look at East Africa, you will note that it's sort of mid-range in terms of 20 to 30% of the equivalent of GDP accounts for imports. Imports is about 20 to 30% of GDP. In other words, what this image shows you with respect to Africa, and especially East Africa, is the high import dependency of our broader region, particularly given the absence of heavy manufacturing. However, if we look at exports, here you'll see, and for example, a moderate level of exports with regard to the East Africa region. Let me go back to imports for a moment in case I didn't linger too long there. Imports, as you can see, between 20 to 30% import dependency for East Africa. But exports we lighter in East Africa. In other words, exports typically account for 10 to 20% of the equivalent of GDP. And the point that I'm making here, quite simply, is that especially given that Uganda is on the cusp of a very significant hydrocarbons era, the litmus test will be to harness the opportunities born of hydrocarbons and to allow it to spill over into an elevated level of industrialization. In other words, it cannot be that the hydrocarbons industry is the first and last tonic for Uganda and the region more broadly, but it becomes a transmission sector for further industrialization and the elevation of the services economy that will be founded on further heavy industrialization. And I think that just speaks to the export orientation opportunity that beckons over the next couple of years, and dare I say decades for the East African zone. I'm going to be a little bit rushed, and I'm going to just talk about now the next chapter would be economic growth. And I want to talk about economic growth within a more distributed sub-Saharan African context. The exhibit you're looking at now, if you look at the image on the left-hand side, it gives you a sense of economic growth in a variety of maybe larger African economies. And it shows you two things. One is that over the first part of, well, the first decade of this century, the early 2000s, well, roughly from 2000 to 2014, you had generally synchronized acceleration, generally synchronized, consistent positive economic growth. But the second meaning from that image on the left is that you will notice the oil economies on western shelf of the continent performed relatively better. Nigeria and Angola were growing in the very high single digits for a perpetual number of years. And in fact, they carried the sub-Saharan Africa growth. Ghana was above the sub-Saharan Africa, same with Uganda, but Kenya was beneath the sub-Saharan Africa, and the same with South Africa, beneath the sub-Saharan African average, even if we were all above the global average. Something different happened over the last roughly 10 years. The oil economies of the western shelf of the continent began to recede. Their oil dependency weighed on them. The lack of diversification hemorrhaged their economies. And now we see, for example, Nigeria and Angola at the more low to mid-single digits at best, whereas East Africa, high single-digit growth for a length of time. One of the points I make is that in a rather odd way, East Africa would be considered to be non-resource dependent. In other words, lesser dependent on the mining sector and more diversification in terms of its economic breadth, which is different to Nigeria and Angola. They tend to be monoline economies, very dependent on oil with very little diversification. So you could almost argue that East Africa, generally speaking, has benefited from decades of non-resources dependency. It's been a gift. They've not suffered a different curse, a resources curse. And now with resources coming more to the fore in the next few years, that resources, to my earlier point, needs to be harnessed for the continued industrialization of East Africa generally, and for layering the services economy, whether it is accounting services, legal services, tourism, hospitality, for that matter. Those need to be amplified across an industrial base, founded on resources as a means to an end rather than resources as an end. South Africa also has been an economy over the last decade in malaise. In the early 2000s, South Africa mustered 4.5% to 5% growth. In the last decade, it has been unable to consistently do better than 1%. And I'll get back to that in a moment. But this exhibit is just to show you growth rates across Africa. On the left-hand side, the map shows you for this year, and on the right-hand side for 2025. What stands out is our estimation of the fairly giddy growth rates across the continent, in the vicinity of 5% and above, 6-7% for East Africa. So the promise and the consistent contribution of East Africa to Pan-African growth or even Sub-Saharan Africa growth will be the outstanding feature, at least for the next decade, and something to be cheered. Now, I did say that I would conclude and introduce South Africa as the final installment of my visit with you, but the idea that there's a very strong correlation between South African growth and Southern African growth. Put differently, if South Africa is growing at 1%, which is what it's been doing in recent times, it contributes 0.7 of a percentage point to the neighborhood growth. If South Africa were to get to 3% steady state growth over the next couple of years, which we envisage, then that will contribute 2 percentage points in terms of Southern African growth buoyancy. Over the last decade, South Africa's growth has followed more or less what I call an arc. In other words, we had fairly elevated growth and accelerated growth in the late 90s and the early 2000s. Subsequently, from around 2008, South Africa experienced a slide in its trend rate of growth. So that arc image, if it were an emoji, it would look like a frown. And I would argue South Africa had 4 chapters of political economy history. Nelson Mandela gave us reconciliation. He allowed us to believe that we could have a shared prosperity across race groups, across ethnic groups. Former President Thabo Mbeki solidified South Africa's institutional fabric. By institutions, I make reference to the judiciary, police services, investigative bodies, prosecutorial agencies, just generally speaking, the rule of law and the political center held. During the former President Jacob Zuma era, our institutions that are the guardrails of society collapsed. And with it, the rule of law, and with it, broad impunity. It's no surprise that as we butchered our institutions, our economic growth collapsed. If I leave you with my visit today with just one message, if you were to recall one thing, I would leave you with this, and it is the lesson from South Africa. 75% of the explanatory power, the formula for growth, is the rule of law. Many economists, many policymakers are surprised when I make this statement, because ordinarily we guided to believe that capital plus even innovation causes growth. Capital in the form of human capital, physical capital, financial capital, plus innovation, when you meld it together, you get growth. And that's true. But we argue that capital plus innovation will only account for 25% of the growth equation. 75% hinges on the rule of law. When South Africa butchered its rule of law, economic growth floundered. And there's evidence from more than 150 countries around the world that confirm the rule of law is the foundation stone for sustained and perpetual economic growth. You could throw all the capital and all the innovation on an economy that has no rule of law. You will effectively be throwing capital innovation on quicksand. It will not prove enduring. And South Africa now is in a stage of reform. It's in a stage of rebuilding our institutions, our rule of law, our governance under incumbent President Cyril Ramaphosa. We think that from roughly 1 percentage point growth in trend over the last couple of years, we are in an advanced stage of repairing what is a very fractured power system. And we think our electricity system will contribute over the near to medium term 1.3 percentage points to growth. Our logistics network, particularly rail, was also severely impugned over the last couple of years, and that is in the early stages of recovery and repair as well. Over the next 3 years, we think that a repair in our rail system under the banner of Transnet, our national rail operator, for goods and people, will contribute about 0.7 of a percentage point to growth. And then we think other reforms like visa reforms, the cost of doing business improvements will contribute about 0.5 percentage point to our growth. So in 3 to 5 years, we think we will accelerate from 1 percentage point steady state growth now to approximately 3.5% growth. And we think that will in turn buoy Southern Africa by an additional 2 to 2.4 percentage points of additional growth in the neighborhood. And hence why I thought I would introduce South Africa to this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, I've come part to the monologue, the formal part of my presentation. As I've suggested, 5 themes that I wanted to share with you. And if I could just conclude by revisiting those in summary, it is not just cyclical change that we are embracing. In this post-COVID world, and an era where we're shifting from the globalization and geopolitics of yesteryear, the type of world that the youth are going to grow up with in the next 20 to 30 years is going to be remarkably different to the type of environment that many of us slightly older individuals were party to over the last 30 years. Different level of restlessness, a different level of aspiration, and a different level of geopolitical conversation requiring a very different level of leadership. The second theme was just to show you the continent in a perhaps a far more charming, seductive way, borderless. Third point was just to show you an export orientation for East Africa is kernel to continuing to buttress industrialization in that particular economy, and in fact across Africa. Fourth was to celebrate East Africa from Ethiopia all the way down to Mozambique. Our sense at Standard Bank is that the eastern corridor of the continent is going to be a vector of economic growth over the next decade to come at the minimum. And then lastly, after malaise, or for at least a decade, maybe 15 years, South Africa seems to be bottoming with better socioeconomic prospects likely to occur over the near to medium term. And that perhaps is a good story for the region in totality. Let me stop there. I'm going to stop sharing now as well in terms of the presentation and PowerPoint content. I seem to be having a little bit of digital failure on my side where I can't see what you've seen, but maybe you can see me, and I can then defer back to the room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gulam. Africa in a new age, a new era. I think Gulam deserves another wonderful round of applause. Gulam has taken us across the continent and brought us back home and showed us a couple of prospects that lie within our borderless opportunities. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to move on with the program, but just picking off from Gulam's presentation, a couple of talking points, the geopolitics. So the question then is, how does a farmer, a coffee farmer in Uganda, get affected by the ESG or energy transition concerns? How does a bakery in Kawempe get impacted by the geopolitics? Well, as you all know, a lot of grain comes from Ukraine and Russia. And therefore, for that baker in Kawempe or Boise or in the upmarket industrial production areas, this is real. This is much closer to home. It looks abstract when you talk about transition to clean energy, but if you put it into perspective, the EU recently passed a legislation that restricts access of commodities that have been grown in deforested areas. Now, that doesn't sound abstract for a coffee farmer in Uganda, because that means if your coffee has been planted in deforested areas, then you're going to have a lot of challenges getting your commodity access into the EU market. Technology. Gulam has touched on that. Logistics. 30% of the global logistics moves through the Suez Canal. We have transporters in the room. How does that impact on your business the moment you see conflict, geopolitical conflicts and tension between Israel, Gaza, and that impacts on the cost of risk premium in terms of goods moving through this channel, and ultimately the cost of haulage of consignments across the oceans and into Uganda. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to move on to the conversation, and we're going to break down the symposium talk today, or the conversation in the room, into 4 key themes: the geopolitics, debt, transition to energy, and technology. And at this point in time, I would like to take the occasion to invite our panelists. The next session will be moderated by Daisy Nitwe, our Stanbic Bank country lead for structured solutions. I would like to invite Daisy on stage. And as Daisy walks on stage, I would like to introduce the other panelists and also invite them on stage. I'd like to invite Christopher. Christopher is part of Gulam's team, so I'm sure he has more to unpack for us. Chris, you're most welcome. And he sits in Nairobi. Now, from the private sector, we have Jocelyn Kateba, the Managing Director, Crestform. Jocelyn, you're most welcome. Happy to have you in the room. And then from the Central Bank, we do have Dr. Adam Mugume, Executive Director, Research, Bank of Uganda. So as you can see, we have a very well collected, selected, very knowledgeable panel of panelists who are going to be assisting us in the next 1 hour to unpack these themes. And like I said, these are not abstract. If you thought these were abstract, you need to rethink. because these are much closer to home. Transition to clean energy, geopolitics, technology, and debt. And as they prepare to get their seats, just to touch more on what Ghulam did hint on, a new era. It's so exciting to look at the immense opportunities that lie for Africa and for Uganda more specifically. And one key takeaway from Ghulam's presentation was resources not as an end, but as a means to an end. We are getting into fast oil a few months down the road. The question in the room, will resources be an end for us or a means to an end? Can you take off?
Is that okay? Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning once again, and welcome, a warm, warm welcome, a blue kind of welcome to this panel conversation. We've called you here a number of times before to this very room, and when we did, we called it an economic forum. And so we focused our conversation on interest rates, on exchange rates, on inflation, and on growth. We've seen the need to understand that by the time interest rates change or shift, a lot has been happening in the background. And so the conversation today is really to say, how do we get a hold of the shifts in this economy just before they actually land, before you start to see them in the price of goods from the supermarket next door? Peter Drucker, a renowned management consultant, did say, and I quote, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence itself. It's to approach it with yesterday's logic." And this is the premise of this conversation, to say that we've done the same things over and over and over. But Ghulam has highlighted about 8 or 9 things that are potentially shifting the global economy. And every single one of us operates within this economy. So it's to say, how will these things land? Because by the time they land, it's probably too late for you to make any amendments. So our conversation today is to focus on 2 things. One, to shine a light on some of these shifts that in the course of running your business, you've probably not paid attention to. But the second part, which I think is actually the more relevant one, is to say that some of these things you've heard before. You've heard about technology, you've heard about energy transition, there are some key buzzwords. But they seem abstract because you don't know how you get to land them for your business. And that's what the distinguished panelists will help us to bring home today. So if you'll allow me to use the next 45 minutes or so to listen from these brilliant minds, and then we'll engage in a Q&A. So in the next 5 to 7 minutes, I'm just going to start by asking each of our panelists, if you could please highlight, Ghulam has gone through a fairly different but insightful presentation. If each of you could please highlight for us what stood out for you, and obviously why. Dr. Mugume, if you please allow me to start with you. Of the things that Ghulam has mentioned could affect the global economy and by extension our own economy, what stands out for you and why is that what you think we must go away with today?
Thank you so much. I think he has highlighted the things that we are grappling with. Number one, mainly on something that we had forgotten about in our literature about industrial policy, re-emergence of industrial policy of 1960s and 1970s and 80s, where we saw countries doing what we used to call inward-oriented policies, where you are protecting your industries, you are restricting trade, putting on different sorts of reasons to why to restrict trade. And I think this is something that is disturbing. And unfortunately, even when the Europe does or the Americans do such a kind of industrial policies, also back home in our African countries, we tend to copy. You start looking at also, remember what we used to call import industrialization, import substitution industrialization strategies, but that is good, but can also be distortion. And I think that's what we are seeing. And if you see the global statistics in terms of trade, you see that all of a sudden the trade is shrinking, and yet global trade is shrinking, yet normally global trade is an indicator of the global growth. So, and I think really that's one of the things that is hitting. And the question is, if this continues, and then African countries copy the same, where do we end? Do we go back to 1960s and 70s, where each country was saying, you know, I have to protect my industries, restrict trade? I think that is really a big challenge.
Thank you, Dr. Mugume. So from Dr. Mugume, it's industrial policy, and whether we need to be revising that. Jocelyn, if I could please come to you now.
Can you hear me? Yes. Good morning, and thank you, Daisy, and to the team for inviting me to this panel. I think in Ghulam's presentation, what really struck me was his choice of words. He talked about seismic change. You know, he used that very, very dramatic phrase, and I agree with him that the world that we have been in and what has been in the past is not clearly going to be where we're going. But I think as a player in the manufacturing sector, I think what that sort of triggered in my head is this whole concept around, you know, we hear words like VUCA, volatile, very uncertain, complex, ambiguous, you know, times that we're in. And the challenge that also spills over for us is, you know, we like to plan ahead. Yeah. Typically when you are, you know, an investor, whether you're in the agricultural sector or manufacturing or even in oil and gas, you know, by the time you think about an idea and then you think about the time it takes to execute on that idea, there's a time lag, right? And if we're talking about, you know, tremendous change is kind of what we're seeing in the new era that he proposed. The challenge is when we arrive and are ready to go to market, are we going to be out of sync? You know, he mentioned, you know, I think it was the gentleman earlier talked about how the European Union, for instance, is saying if you have coffee in areas where you've cut trees, that will not be welcome in that market. So, you know, it takes a couple of years to grow coffee, just to give an example. The same is true when you're putting a plant into execution. So I think there's that issue around, you know, how shall we make sure that whatever we're doing is in sync with what is needed at the time it arrives to market. And then there's the other issue around, you know, when we go to finance, you know, one of the challenges we have in industry is that we have very short options when it comes to long-term financing. So when this environment is what we're expecting, then we are looking at potentially, you know, having more challenges going forward in terms of how does one even understand, you know, those long-term projections? How do you price for them? Will there be availability for financing? So again, you know, a lot of, I guess it struck a chord there and a lot of things to think about in terms of, for those of us who have a lead time in terms of idea and execution, and how do we plan going forward?
Okay, so we've got industrial policy, and now I'm hearing volatility between when you start on a concept and when you actually come to market with it. Christopher, if I could please get your highlight as
well. Thank you for allowing me to be on this panel. The things that struck me from the presentation were, one, when Ghulam talked about moving from resource abundance to resource scarcity. And the reason why I think that will be something quite critical for our region is, if you think about the size of the demographics at the moment, East Africa has around 330 million people, estimated to reach around 500 million people over the next decade. So how are you going to feed these people? such questions come to mind. And thus the need for our countries to invest in securing supply chains, in increasing agricultural productivity, in ensuring that we have sufficient job opportunities for the young people that will be coming into the labor market. So I think that for me is something that came up when I listened to Ghulam's presentation.
Awesome. I think for me, one of the things that struck when he spoke was that the amount of investment that the US is putting into the economy on military is quite significant. But more importantly, when we shift away from the US and we look at China, China is putting in a lot more to grow their economy. And he seemed to suggest that that might be why we see a shift from a global dominance perspective from the West into the East. And that's probably where I want to start this conversation at, to say that if we look at China and the amount of focus they've put on Africa, take for example, if we look at FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, there's been 9 summits. If we compare that with the US, there's only been 2, and even then it's been in a space of a decade. The first in 2014, I think the next one in 2022. If we look at it from a trade flows perspective, and I'm really trying to put my mind around who really is taking global dominance. Is it China or is it the US that we've known traditionally? So if you look at it from a trade perspective, at $280 billion annually, China is 4 times, China's investment in trade in Africa is 4 times more than that of the US. If you even go a step lower and look at it from an infrastructure spend, I've seen some of our contractors in this room. China has about $150 billion into Africa compared to an even more dismal number of the US. So there's something about China that China seemed to be saying to Africa, and there's something that we are saying. The challenge that I want us to get out of here with is to say that how do we take advantage of this shift? So Christopher, if I start with you, how do we get to a place where we know that East Africa has a place in this shift in, how things are happening? So how can East Africa position? And because this is a business forum, how can our clients sort of align themselves to tap into this that's happening? And I know most of them do have business and linkages with China. So if you can just give us some context on that.
So I think it was also touched in the presentation, the fact that if you look at external trade from East Africa, imports account for around 20 to 30%, while exports around 10 to 20%. So my sense is, to answer your question, Africa needs, or East Africa needs to position itself to export more, to try and increase the business opportunities with the East and also with the West, take advantage of the abundant resources that we have. If you think about the oil developments that are happening in this country, the potential for liquefied natural gas in Tanzania, rare earths in Kenya, I think that there will be tremendous opportunity to position our regions, not just on a resource base, but also when you think of the demographic I mentioned earlier. We have, if you think of the East and the West, aging populations, youthful population in Africa, how can we provide that resource to the rest of the world? So my sense is we need to think about that. We need to think about increasing the economic complexity of our economies. And from that, when we increase the knowledge that we share or the educational levels within our East Africa, that will help to increase that economic complexity, and we'll be able to tap into the opportunity that China is presenting to the continent. And also, to some extent, we are seeing the West trying to come back to recapture what they lost. So I think by increasing export orientation, by finding ways to send more of our youth to the East and also to the West, that will enhance some of this opportunity that we see from China and also from the US. So I think my sense is we have, in a multipolar world, you have more options. And I think that's the opportunity for most entrepreneurs. It's not like in the past when you could only say, we'll focus on the West. Now you have the East, you have India emerging. So there is more multiplicity of opportunity for East Africa, more markets to tap into.
I think one of the things that I like to look at is that we have the resources that China is looking for. Maybe there's a policy gap that needs to be bridged in terms of how do we get access to sending out some of these things into China. And hopefully Dr. Adam along the way will touch on that, but if he doesn't, it's probably one that we're going to take away to say how do we actually look to do that. The challenge that if you're a policymaker you start to face is that there's also a sector of economists that assert that Chinese support into economy in Uganda or even in Africa, if you look at it from a continent perspective, has come with a fairly heavy debt burden. And if you look across the continent, we've had a number of debt events or even restructures or debt defaults in some. If you look at Ethiopia, if you look at Zambia, and even more recently, Ghana. But I just want to bring that closer to home and say, if we look at Kenya, we had the June 2024 maturity that sort of made a bit of headlines in the market. But even away from that, we are likely to see Kenya get a downgrade from the rating agencies on their economy, a third downgrade in a space of just 2 months. And because most of our fortunes are tied to Kenya, we have a number of businesses that have linkages to Kenya. We also have a number of businesses here that have actually expanded into Kenya. I'd like to know, Dr. Mugume, from where you sit, how do you expect that everything that's happening in Kenya might impact us as a country? Are there any policy sort of moves that are being taken to safeguard us? And then maybe we'll get into how that might affect borrowing costs for everybody in this room.
Well, I mean, when your neighbor has a problem, obviously it feeds into your own household. But again, we have to take it into perspective. I think Kenyan challenge is completely different from our side. And I don't think Kenya, although the bonds are now called junk, but I think Kenya is on a strong footing in the sense that, well, it could have had challenges in repaying the $2 billion worth of debt maturities, etc. But I think it was really not to that extent of being downgraded to a junk or to that kind of state. Because the fundamentals for Kenya are really strong. They are really, I don't see anything apart from the politics of it. I don't think really Kenya has really weak fundamentals that we could be fearing. The second thing is Kenya is politically sound. And so normally it is a combination of poor governance and then the macros that distort the economic fundamentals. So in the case of Kenya, therefore, we don't think really there is something that could fundamentally shift Kenya that can really spill over into Uganda. Now, coming back to Ugandan side, we all have borrowed. I mean, there's no country that doesn't borrow. The Americans borrow by printing their own dollars because they have the global printer for the dollars, okay? For us, we can't print Uganda shillings to buy a tractor or to do a road. So that's where there is a difference. So all countries borrow. So the question is really what you are doing with the borrowing, and are you growing the economy? So going back, and I think that was clear from the presentation we saw, the economic growth are pointing to a positive. So the ability, therefore, to borrow and repay are really not really naturally affected. We could have bumps on the road, yes. Could have a situation where you have borrowed and constructed a road, but probably the returns for constructing that road are not really, coming. That's what we call you are borrowing to do a non-tradable good. You are increasing non-tradable by borrowing, and therefore you have a problem in debt servicing, many when it is external. So really, and it's cutting across many countries, it is true. In Uganda, are we seeing, challenges in terms of debt repayment? Not necessarily. There could be bumps here and there because, for example, this year we have a debt service of around $1.3 billion. for this year alone. And a bit of that is Chinese, obviously, because they did the roads etc. So, but I don't think really that should be a big challenge. It can be a challenge in 1 year or down the whatever in the course of the year. But overall, I think with the good economic fundamentals, with the growth that are pointing really positive, I don't think we should get worried about the challenges of debt servicing.
I guess that's a bit reassuring that whatever is happening in Kenya, even if we're watching it very closely, will not exactly kill our economy, will not kill our economy, if I hear you correctly. But also to say that even with all the debt concerns that we have as a country, the policymakers are on top of it. And the reason that's important is because when we look at policy direction in terms of rates, it does have an implication on our borrowing rates. So if CBR, the central bank rate, is starting to go up, we expect that your borrowing rates will be revised accordingly. But from what you're hearing for Dr. Mugume, it does look like this is well under control and maybe no cause for concern. And we'll take any questions that you might have. I want to pivot a bit and move into a fairly different theme, which is energy. Energy transition, or ESG, some of the things that we've heard a lot on the streets. Climate change has made energy transition completely inevitable. We cannot ignore it. And unfortunate for us, even if as a continent we don't contribute significantly to global emissions, nowhere in the world is the impact of climate change more felt than on the African continent. And because of that, we've got to be seen to participate meaningfully in energy transition and in making it more acceptable and more supportive of what we're looking to do. So based off of that, and I want to come to Jocelyn on that, when we speak energy transition, how near is it to your business, really? Are there any actionable steps that, maybe not even in your business, but you've seen being taken on in businesses, or things that people in the room can start to consider from an energy transition perspective?
Yes, this is a very important topic, because I think all of us have heard about ESG and how this is becoming a very important area that we must look at. And there are different angles that come with it, or should I say pillars, that are pushing on this. So from where we're seated in business, there's the regulatory aspects. So you see this, and when I say regulatory, I'm talking about your NEMA as an example. To some extent, actually, the UNBS. Our factory just went through our annual QMark certification, and in there you have aspects around how do you deal with your chemical waste, how do you, make sure that your impact on the environment is being taken care of or mitigated. And then you have, areas when you think about the financing sector. When we go to fund our businesses, you'll typically start to see a growing ask around what are you doing on the ESG side of things. And that is actually becoming louder. I think it wasn't that loud a couple of years ago, but I feel like in recent years that's becoming very, very clear. And then also on the customer side, so we talked about the EU, imposing that if you're cutting down trees and planting coffee, then that will not be welcome into the EU markets. But we are also seeing it, from the side of our business when you go to tender. So when I fill in a tender form for, especially the expected suspects there would be, of course, the multinationals or the NGOs such as the UN, or if I'm doing a tender for World Vision. But interestingly, I've started to see with some pre-qualifications, companies that are, or organizations that are like the schools, where we typically will be targeting to sell our mattresses. In a lot of when we are putting our submission documents, you're seeing an ask around, can you tell us what you're doing on the environmental, what certifications do you have? So to bring it a bit closer, I wanted to paint that picture and just say, there is kind of a louder voices coming in from all these different angles. And then, of course, as a business, you want to be a good global citizen. Once you get awareness that this is something that is really important, the next step is, what are you going to do about it for yourself? So you have your own strategic plans that you put in place. I'll bring it to our company and sort of what our journey is, and it is really an ongoing journey. Where we started, paying more attention was when we started looking at our ISO 14001 environmental management system certification. We were able to actually get support from GIZ, courtesy of UMA, so to other manufacturers out there. You know, sometimes some of these certifications can feel daunting, or, you know, just understanding where to start from is always a challenge. But that is why we have associations such as the Uganda Manufacturers Association to guide you on how others have started that journey, and also the support that is available. So we did that, got GIZ to fund a grant for us, and we got consultants in, and then we had the beginning of the journey where you deal with kind of, you know, an overview of where you are. You know, what is your environmental footprint as an organization? Now, as you can imagine, so I just give you a quick one on this one. Mattresses are actually made out of material that is from petrochemicals. You know, so whatever you're sitting on right now, those cushy cushions that you have some bit of dirty energy in there, just so you know. Of course, there are options, and we have also paid attention to, you know, what are the trends in our sectors around, you know, coming through with biofuels. What could that look like? But the challenge that you quickly come to realize is that where the biggest proportion of your, especially as an industrialist, environmental impact is, where if you want to make changes, there's a huge investment change that has to happen. I'll give the simple example of a car. If you wanted, as a person, an individual, most of us in this room are driving cars. If tomorrow you wanted to have a lower carbon emission as an individual contribution to the environment, it would mean you'd have to change that car. You'd have to get either a hybrid car or electric car, but then there are a lot of implications around that. So you have to fund that car. Then, of course, there's going to be all the other issues around the enabling environment. Where are you going to power that car, and how far will it take you? So, in short, I think when we did our assessment of, as a business, our economic footprint and the changes we would have to make, we quickly realized that there were certain things that would mean we would have to change our entire plant, as an example. And that alone is, now you're talking millions of dollars. Then you start looking at, okay, what are the other ones which are low-hanging? And so that's where we probably in our journey have focused our efforts. The first, of course, was, like I said, getting that certification, so that we went through having very clear things of measure that we're saying, okay, we're going to put targets and try and get those reduced. So things around paper, you know, we have our ERP system in place, so we cut down on the paper. We looked at recycling. Recycling is actually very big in manufacturing, but can be very broad. In our case, we did put in a plant with the help of UDB to help us to recycle some of our waste, so that we could actually minimize those non-biodegradable components being put in the environment. So the point here is there is a lot of work, and there is a lot of you know, thought that has to go into it. I'll just finish on the plant one. So there are alternatives to petrochemicals for the usage of, if you want to use as inputs to make foam. However, the challenge is, what is the readiness and what is the quantum of supply to then support you? So it's, even if I had wanted to put in a new plant tomorrow, where am I going to source those inputs that can, and in what, how much will they be? Where will I source them? Do you have the quantum? Has that investment downfield been done? And so there's all those issues that have to be sorted. And then the last one I'll finish with is, what is the readiness for the consumer that I am serving today? Because I am in a low-developed country where the consumer is paying attention to price. So a lot of times when these, you know, energy things come in, then you have the technological aspects to support them, and then now you're talking about additional costs, then all of a sudden, are you able in the market to actually find a market for this? And so you find that a lot of the green mattresses, an example being a rubber mattress sold out in California, the price tag, I'm sorry, I don't know how many people in this room could afford it. And so ultimately, those are some of the challenges that we are battling with. But for sure, we start with the low-hanging, and our journey has been, one, to get certification, like I said, supported with you know, the players in the market, starting with UMA. And the second one is saying, okay, there are different things you could do differently. So we have even contracts with companies like DeWest that come and take our chemicals and actually deal with those hazardous materials separately from just disposing them into any rubbish pit. So we take the low-hanging and continue to monitor, but it's an ongoing journey. Thanks.
I think what I hear from you is that there is benefits to getting into the energy transition, even the ESG journey. And because we're sitting with business people, what would be on my mind if I was in this audience is to say that for all this investment that I'll do to transition into, cleaner energy or any such thing, what benefit do I have? After how long do I start to touch this, do I start to see the fruit of my investment? At what point do I see a return on this investment? And I know that Bank of Uganda, in conversation with the UBA, has come up with a framework for ESG. And I know that some benefits do exist. But maybe, Dr. Mugume, if we just take something from you, are there any incentives that you're considering either to the banks to enable ESG lending, such that even when somebody's taking a decision to say that I'd like to invest 1 or 2 or 3 things in this transition story because ultimately it's good for my company, but it's going to cost me today. So is there any incentives to say that when you get this, maybe there's a subsidy on your loan, or maybe there's some type of recognition or reward that you find? Go for it, Jocelyn.
Sorry, I beg to just finish my submission on this particular piece on the benefits.
Yep.
So the first benefit, and one of the big things that we're seeing is if you can demonstrate that you have put in quite a lot of effort in being more corporate responsible towards the environment and sustainability in general, what it does is that it sets you apart from your competitors. So that is the first benefit. You remember I started by saying when we go into tender, some of the documents that we are required to put in are related to that. The other thing that we're seeing, if you look at the export market in general, you hear words such as traceability and the importance to get even certain levels of certification to access and even have a premium. And actually in those export markets, you can sell those products that are coming from places where you have demonstrated very good care and sell them at a good premium. So you might not necessarily, that might not apply to selling them here in Uganda because we are LDC, but when you're looking at the target markets and where we want to be as a country in general, having and demonstrating a strength around ESG, whether it is sourcing financing or actually sourcing markets and at a premium, you quickly can get some of that return as well. I just wanted to finish with that. Thanks.
As the banking industry, what Bank of Uganda did was to first issue the guidelines that the banks would follow, or regulated financial institutions would follow, in terms of really putting in the risks that come from climate change. So our approach has been, yes, first give the guidelines, but we believe that the guidelines will not be, we may not necessarily drive the change very fast. So there is a sort that probably we need both a carrot and a stick in this, really to move fast. A carrot, if you don't change, the way the banks are lending to particular entities that are polluting environment, and then as a regulator, you have to say, okay, what stick do I use in this case? We have given you the guidelines to follow how to put in the risk aspect that are coming from climate. The question we have been discussing is what stick can we use? Could it be, for example, don't take it from me that we are saying that, could it be the case that if we find a bank that probably is not bothered about climate, we increase its reserve requirement, cash reserve requirement, compared to the other one, does behave differently? I see we have been discussing on that kind of arrangement to see whether we can use a carrot and a stick at the same time. But lucky enough, most of our banks actually have been quite sensitive. Actually, most of the banks have moved faster than the central bank in terms of really taking on the climate aspect. There are several banks that have moved very fast, pricing in climate risks into the pricing. If you are a polluter, I think in some of the banks you see that actually the interest you are charged could be much higher than, for example, if we are dealing with aspect of really putting in climate risk into the pricing. So we have already started seeing that, but I think it's still early to see really how do we move. I know we are also in touch with the government also another arrangement to have a countrywide kind of framework, including green bonds that could be coming, let alone some years ahead, or even if not this year. But we are looking at a holistic kind of framework where we use a carrot, where if it is necessary, we use the stick, and also government coming on in some of the aspects, like green bonds, as I said.
Thank you so much. I think if I quickly pivot out, so what I sort of pick is that there are some benefits that accrue from being able to transition into clean energy, but maybe there's a place for us, even as a bank, to start to articulate those to our audience today and, to a much wider reach of our clients. I've heard, for example, that there could be some subsidies on loans if somebody is, investing in a green. There's a lot more access to financing from that perspective. And I'm going to just quickly go back into debt. And Chris, if I come back to you. One of the bigger problems that we have, borrowing from Ghulam's conversation on sovereign debt and government debt, one of the other challenges that we're faced with is that we have a big portion of government revenue going to service debts. When that happens, we are eating into the pocket of development expenditure. And the private sector here starts to struggle. It starts to be a conversation of what's available to pay my areas, what's available to invest in, enabling infrastructure for some of these businesses. If we could please draw from your Kenya experience, what have you seen to be the direct impact of high costs of debt service to businesses, maybe private sector or businesses in general?
So in Kenya, what we've seen over the last, I would say, 5 years has been, as the debt service has increased, I think it used to be in the region of 30% to ordinary revenue. Today it's at 60, meaning that every 100 shillings that the government collects, 60 of that goes towards debt service. Now, the consequence of that is we are seeing less investment by government in development initiatives. Just recently, we've seen them also cut development expenditure further. So initially, it was in the region of 5% of GDP. It's now slowed down to around 3% of GDP. Government has struggled to pay suppliers. So we've also seen in the same period over the last 5 years that not just because of the slowdown in government spending on the development sector, but generally because of COVID and the cost of living crisis, that pending bills have increased. At the moment in Kenya, they stand at around $6 billion US. And government is struggling to pay these arrears. So in addition to a heavy debt burden, government is struggling to pay suppliers that they contracted over the last decade. On the private sector side, the private sector has been what has been driving the Kenyan economy. But given the elevated debt levels and the fact that the central bank has had to restrict or tighten its monetary policy lately, we've seen private sector credit growth shrinking. And from conversations and also anecdotal surveys that we do at Stanbic, we've noticed that I would say the sentiment by the private sector has continued to decline. We usually conduct monthly PMI surveys, and over the last 5 years, what you can see is that the level of optimism has declined relative to, for example, what I see here in Uganda. If you look at the optimism that business people in Uganda have compared to the optimism that Kenyan business people have on their economy, you can see the gap is close to 30%, where people are very optimistic here in Uganda about the prospects of the economy, while the prospects for the Kenyan economy have declined quite considerably. And that reflects the fact that cost of doing business has increased. The interest rates at the moment are quite restrictive, so businesses are delaying investment decisions until you have favorable conditions. So you are seeing, when you have elevated debt burdens, that the private sector also begins to slow down because the environment becomes quite difficult to operate in. I think that's the risk that we face within East Africa, that if we borrow quite aggressively, you will, over time, constrain the ability of the economy to expand.
Thanks, Chris. And I think staying on the topic of borrowing, I'm going to quickly come back to Dr. Mugume, specifically to cover some of the macros that concern Uganda, which is a very keen interest to everybody here. The shilling has been very, very resilient, at least in comparison to its sub-Saharan African peers. We've seen appreciation where we didn't expect it, where people called for depreciation. We've seen the shilling surprise us in many ways. What are some of the factors that underpin this strength, and how sustainable is it?
Sorry, you have hinted on it. Yes, Uganda currency has been remarkably stable, even to our own surprise as central bank, incidentally. Let me be frank on that one. But there are two main aspects that we saw which we never anticipated. One, we saw good coffee prices helping us, in getting good proceeds from coffee. And I think we have just ended the first season of coffee. That helped in terms of really inflows. That helped to stabilize the shilling. But on the other hand, remember that we tightened monetary policy for a while. Remember, we first increased the CBR from 9.5 to 10.25, in addition to increasing CRR, or what we call cash reserve requirement, also from 8 to 10. And I think you saw that from last 2023 to date, actually most of the banks were accessing Bank of Uganda money, what we call standing lending facility, which used to be not to be the case. So it means that liquidity was very, very tight in the system. So to buy dollars, you require shillings. So if the shilling is not easily available, automatically restricts partly the demand also for the dollar. So that is on the monetary side. The other inherent, which is it just comes as an offside kind of thing, is the fact that also government expenditure was probably more on the dollar side. You have the government expenditure equivalent around 6 trillion out of the budget that was going into the debt service, which was in dollars. So normally when they are doing debt service, like in the last fiscal year, they give Bank of Uganda the shillings, we give them the dollars. So in the process, therefore, once they have mobilized the shillings from the taxes and they pass it over, they no longer spend the shillings. So it is a withdrawal from the system. They give the central bank to get the dollars. That also restricts the liquidity into the system. So a combination of that, therefore, helped in terms of really stabilizing the shilling. Are we likely to see the shilling remaining where it is? For now, number one, yes, we are off the coffee season. We are looking at the new coffee season, probably towards the end of the year. We know that coffee in Vietnam is likely to be affected, which is Robusta coffee. Brazilian coffee is recovering a bit. So overall, the coffee prices could remain strong, therefore helping our inflows on that angle. We also see that, again, government is going to spend more on debt servicing in the course of the year. So on the liquidity injection side, ETC, we don't see a lot of liquidity coming into the system. And then you have also global interest rates that are easing. So once the Fed rate comes down, obviously the offshore guys whom we had started seeing exiting, probably we believe they will start coming back into our domestic market. So that combination seems to be giving us a more favorable outlook in terms of exchange rate, that probably the exchange rate may not continue depreciating the way we had in some time back. Like towards the end of 2023, we had anticipated that probably by now the shilling would be in the range of 4,000. But you can see that now we are far, far below. We are talking about 3,720 to 50. So automatically, Is it likely to appreciate? It's still too early to say, but I think I would go with stability, that the currency is likely to remain stable, given the global development, given the coffee prices, given also the inflows we are seeing in terms of the oil investment, and also other extractive industry, including gold. So given that, we believe that probably the currency will likely remain quite stable.
Awesome. Christopher, Standard Bank view on currency?
No, I think we align with where the Bank of Uganda is because, as you mentioned, coffee prices have been quite favorable. There was an expectation that as we get into the months of September, you will have a bit of dividend repayment that happens around that time. But despite that, we do anticipate that the currency will remain steady at around 37 to 3,800 levels between now and year end.
Awesome. So if I hear you correctly, we all are expecting stability on the back of...
Yes, so we anticipate stability on the back of positive FX inflows and also the right level of central bank policy stance that will remain quite attractive for foreign investors to come in.
Awesome. Our time is very fast spent, and if I see the questions that a number of you are posting on here, they're mostly related to currency and interest rates. So I want to quickly close it here just so that we allow enough time for Q&A. But as a way of accountability, when we come to these gatherings and we have these conversations, we usually sort of leave some things that we know will really, really happen or we expect will happen, such that when we next gather, that's where we start from. So I'm going to ask our panelists, if each one of you can please just, in your closing remarks, just tell us the one thing that you want our audience to keep an eye on, and then we'll quickly go into Q&A. If I could please start with you, Jocelyn.
The one thing, just thinking quickly, I think, there was a lot that Ghulam shared with us, and it's really hard to choose just one. But I think maybe we'll start with where my initial remarks were, just around, this very volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment we're in, and maybe just the implication from that is more kind of short-termism, if we could call it that, because really the truth is when we are in that sort of environment, it's really hard to forecast beyond kind of your short to medium term. And therefore, I think from where I'm seated, I think it's more around more caution, simply because, there's just so much that is unclear. I talked about, you might put some, we need to have investments because that's what drives growth. But how we think through that and how we finance that, has to have at least some level of patient capital in our case, because ultimately, the shocks, should they be there, can actually leave some of us as players in a very, very vulnerable place. So I think for me, it's really just, trying to get my head around, this new era, as he mentioned, and sort of how to position, how to strategize, and really make sure we're making the right calls at the right time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Chris, if we could just get your parting.
I'm looking forward to the progress that Uganda will make with regards to the oil sector developments. I think there's tremendous opportunity there, and not just for that sector alone, but then the multiply effect that will have on other sectors of the economy. So that's something exciting to look out for.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Dr. Mugume, in closing remarks.
Yes, I tend to agree that the road ahead is bumpy, but quite promising also on the other hand. So it is a question of really balancing where I sit in the central bank. Yes, we believe yes, short term could be more bumpy than the medium, probably long term. But normally when we talk long term in economics, we always say, but in the long run, we are all dead. So the question, therefore, we tend to emphasize short to medium term. But overall, I think it looks really, really promising, although, again, as I said, the road is bumpy.
Awesome. We will close it here. I'm just going to quickly summarize what some of the key things were. I think for Dr. Adam, what he implores us to pay attention to is really a change in industrial policy and the potential impact on growth or even elevated cost of inputs. Jocelyn, I think what I kept hearing was VUCA, volatile environment, and particularly challenging, where you've got to plan your long-term capital, which is probably a challenge you're living with us as a bank, as your bankers. Chris, resource scarcity and how important it's going to be for us to secure supply lines and also, of course, the position for exports. The more reassuring thing is that Dr. Mugume thinks Kenya's fundamentals remain strong, no emergent risk, but more importantly, Uganda then remains intact from an exposure to Kenya perspective. Josephine, I think on the ESG journey, she's also highlighted that we must stick to the low-hanging fruits while we consider the investment into energy transition and business optimism. I think remains key from where Chris sits. I think all these challenges and opportunities are things that we can support you with as a bank. And today, all we're looking to do is sort of to start a conversation to say that these are some of the things, and even if they may appear abstract, we're open to walk the journey with you to sort of break them down. And a number of your bankers will be here even after this conversation. But without much ado, I'd just like to open it up for Q&A at this point. So if you have any questions for Gulam and also for the panelists, now is the time. If you have any questions online as well. I think we do have a number of microphones. If we could just get a microphone over to that table.
Thank you, Daisy. Doctor said in the long run we die, but until we die, we need to navigate the risks and the environment we live in. Thank you so much to our panelists. And like Daisy mentioned, there are a couple of microphones around. Also to our online audience, we request that you slot in your questions on the chat. Otherwise, we can take it away. I think there's a microphone with Diana.
Thank you, everyone. My question was to Jocelyn, particularly from the ESG side and what you, I think in the extractive industry, just as you mentioned, what is the balance that you have to strike when interest rates are rising, but you still have to keep your ESG concerns for your business balanced out for purposes of your keeping your business going?
Want me to answer right away? Okay.
I'll propose we pick 3 questions and then we do the responses.
Thank you very much to the panelists and thank you to Stanbic for organizing this event. My name is Joel. I'm Joel Basoga. I'm the head of technology at H&G Advocates. And I've really enjoyed the discussion and I appreciate some of the points that were made, specifically on the importance of ESG and also traceability. But also from the field in which I practice, law, but also as a sub-segment of it, I think the discussion also, and this is what I'm curious to hear from the panelists, what are your insights on the general developments in technology? Because even outside this room and in this room, there's been, rapid advancements, especially in terms of technologies that process data, that are able to increase outputs, especially when you are processing financial information for credit scoring. And I'm just curious to hear from, from the regulator's perspective, but also from the practitioners here. What do you see as the role of technology and what insights can you offer to the audience, especially as we think about what the market standing is? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Aileen Nsima. I'm a portfolio manager with Sanlam Investments, Uganda. My question is directed to Dr. Mugume. We are at a pivotal time in the country, as we have seen in the different discussions we've had, where we could take advantage of the opportunities to accelerate our growth faster, However, there are certain key challenges we've also highlighted. My question is in regards to the bumpiness that you have mentioned in your last remarks. What are some of those bumps that you foresee from where you sit as Director of Research, and how are we going to navigate them so that our medium term looks as optimistic as you say it is? Thanks.
We can take those maybe. I think we can take those. Can we start with you, Dr. Adam, or can we start with you?
On the question of what do we see as a technological development in our field, is a challenge. We deal with fintechs, for example, and we see is an area as a central bank, to be sincere, we are ignorant of. We are also learning. In the sense, they are moving much faster than the central bank. They are offering loans, for example, which we don't capture. The fintech loans, we don't capture them in our usual data. So when we talk about private sector credit, it excludes such a kind of fintech lending. So is one of the areas, for example, we are grappling with how really do we take on board whatever they are doing. But we're also seeing a lot of innovation. For example, now we are all in artificial intelligence, whether it is data analytics. Actually, now we are being challenged. We need to look at traditional ways of getting information, the surveys, looking at whatever. Can we use AI, big data analytics and AI, and come up with estimates about GDP? And that's what we are grappling with. And I think this is the way to go. And we're already seeing that coming in, on board in the area, and we believe that we are still learning. And we are grappling with how do you regulate these developments in technology. They are moving very fast. You don't need to kill them. You need to encourage them in terms of innovation and hub. But they also, remember, they also cause challenges in the industry with cyber attacks and security issues, etc. So those are the issues really we are grappling with as a regulator. On the question, what we see as a bumpy road ahead, one of the issues is, for example, as from the central bank perspective, we see that our reserves, because of debt service, have come down. And so with less reserves, now we are standing at around 3.3 billion with dollars worth around 3 months of import cover. We are coming from 4.8 or so months of import cover. And we know the challenge has been we are having debt service, as I said, 1.3 billion this year, 1.2 last year. And our ability to buy the dollars from the market has been constrained by the global developments. Because when the global interest rates were high, portfolio exited. And so how then do we build reserves to make sure that we have sufficient reserves in the case of a currency run, you have the muscles to go into the market. That's why now we are talking about going into purchase of gold as a method to cushion ourselves. So for example, we have started a program of gold purchase from the local miners so that we can have gold as part of our reserves, what we call monetary gold. So, but it all comes from, you have high debt service, but then you don't have enough reserves to support you. What do you do in the case when the currency is really volatile? So that's one of the bump we are seeing. The other bump is we are living in, as I said, where all of a sudden you can have a trade restriction from your neighbor. Kenya, let me be sincere, Kenya has been one of the countries that give us a bloody beating. When they cut no milk, no egg, and then you have eggs that are rotting at the border, and remember you have regional integration. What do you do? So, and that's why we are talking about industrial policy. So those are some of the bumps that we see, and they are likely to increase with different political developments within the region. Another big market where we export our goods is DRC. Last year, I think we exported goods worth around 800 million to DRC, actually much higher than Kenya. And you know the volatile environment in DRC. And we are exporting semi-manufactured goods and some of agricultural produce. So in the event that you have a bit of continued volatility in the eastern part of DRC, that's another bump we are talking about. So all those, really, that's what I'm saying. The road ahead is bumpy, but I think we can maneuver through with, different policy measures as we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mugume. Jocelyn, if you could please take the question in ESG.
Okay, but I wanted to also add a little bit on the technology aspects and how we're seeing it in industry before I go to the ESG one. So on the technology side, I'll give the most hot topic, I think, that we've had, which is IFRS. So if you're an industrial player like some of us, we've had to, from a compliance point of view, put in a lot of investment in order to enable, IFRS compliance. And in that investment, you start off with, you have to have an ERP system because they require a system-to-system integration. Literally, the way it works is before an invoice can be fiscalized, the system will be able to go and look into your inventory. Do you actually have the stock to sell? So if you don't have the stock, when the invoice is being processed, there will be no fiscalization, and then you are not compliant. So just from that alone, so what we're seeing is that from a regulatory point of view, we're being propelled into this environment where historically, as a manufacturer, you probably could get away without an ERP and do some things manually. But if you're entering into this space and you want to be compliant, or you have to be compliant, then some of those technological things come in. The last piece I'll give you as an example is, again, as industrialists, you go out to put a plant in place or machines in place. What we're seeing now is a lot of those machines coming from overseas, of course, because we don't make machines in Uganda, unfortunately, are coming very automated. This week, I was sharing earlier with Daisy, I think, about one of our machines was down, and the first thing that our supplier told us was, get it online, give me any desk access, and let me start doing the diagnostics and troubleshooting from Taiwan. The benefit with that, of course, is that you quickly get solutions. You don't have to now fly someone that's highly skilled all the way from Taiwan to come here. That would take you a couple of days. But then when they come here in the past, then they would do the diagnostics. Then you have to then think about what parts are required to repair. So another lead time issue. So there's a quick benefit there that you can move faster. On the downside, though, is, our people are not ready. Our education system is not ready to give us the talent that is needed to work on some of these highly automated and highly specialized. So you're seeing in future a high risk of high dependency, depending on where you're sourcing from. So a lot of interesting things in that sense to think about. On the ESG side, the gentleman asked about this balancing act. The truth of the matter is, if you are to stay competitive, given what I started off with earlier on, I said, we're having regulatory pressures. I talked about NEMA. You're having, issues around financing. When you go to finance, the voice is getting louder. What's your ESG strategy? You're having cases of customers. We talked about the EU market, but even, locally for some of us who participate in the tenders. So in a way, it's no longer a nice to have. It's no longer at your, leisure to do something. You actually have to do something. And then, of course, the last one is simply that you want to be a good corporate citizen. So the reality is, the first thing is you map out what are the things that in your business, what is your environmental footprint looking like? What can I start with? What's my journey, and tell that story around there. But inevitably, ESG is here. It's not going anywhere. The voices are from all over. And you just have to get on with it, literally.
Thanks, Jocelyn. We have a question coming in for Gulam. I hope he's online. But even before then, when you were speaking about technology, I think one of the conversations that we've had before is that if you are a manufacturer and you have a machine of some type or kind, we're moving into a space where your machine will break down, and because the rest of the world has moved on from a technology perspective, you can't even access the after sales, you can't access the spare parts. So it's important that as the rest of the world moves, you move along, because you'll be left with machines that can't be serviced because everybody else has closed that chapter. Having said that, I don't know if Gulam is on. There's a question here for him. To Gulam, what are 1 or 2 major policy shifts that the East Africa region should focus on to best position herself for this changing landscape? Did you get that?
Thank you for that. I hope you can hear me. So my response would be to feverishly focus on human capital and infrastructure. In other words, upskilling society, and especially the youth, with regard to modern day technologies, as much as they may be fast moving. The second related dynamic to citizenship and skills is to bear in mind in the manner in which much of Africa, with emphasis on East Africa, has bypassed fixed line telephony and rapidly embraced mobile telephones, and mobile telephony in turn catalyzing a whole raft of ancillary technologies and services. So for example, just by way of anecdote, rural incomes in Kenya have been lifted occasionally in excess of 30%, simply as a function of M-Pesa. And this is long-standing. And so that gives additional indirect and induced impact to the rural economy. Telemedicine, tele-education, and the ability to export services from the region to the rest of the world, from the most low level of, for example, call centers, but also, for instance, coding, AI generation, content editing. These are all very distributed, technologically levered services. And then the second item I mentioned was infrastructure, but an infrastructure that connects East Africa even more than it is now. We celebrate East Africa as one of the most integrated regions in the continent, indicatively, whereas many people will highlight intra-Africa trade is around 15-16%, meaning that only 15 to 16% of Africa's trade is with itself. The remainder is between Africa and the rest of the world. But in East Africa, intra-regional trade amongst the region is in the order of 45 to 50%, speaking to the already established integratedness of its trade and its financial flows and just general services. And I think that offers room for extension in terms of harnessing the intra-regional strength for scaling services and exports in the region, for then further amplification and exports into the rest of Africa. And so when I talk about infrastructure, network infrastructure, that is transportation lines, rail, and digital networks that are already well established, but where there is room for further bolting on extension, I think will be very catalytic. And I'll just conclude by saying, typically every $1 or shilling that is invested in infrastructure translates into a multiplier of, at the minimum, 3. In other words, over a 20-year horizon, $1 of spending on constructive infrastructure can generate annually $3 of additional GDP buoyancy. So it's truly bang for your buck. I'll pause there. Thank you.
There's a follow-on for Gulam. What sectors do you think will benefit most out of the shifts you've mentioned? Our customers would like to know the next frontiers of growth.
So this may sound a little bit primitive in the sense that maybe people are expecting me to, again, talk about the frontiers of technology. But I suspect that agriculture offers very significant opportunity in a world where there's increasing hunt for food security and some very vulnerable areas, not just the Middle East, but also in the Far East, that requires growing food security. So I think irrigation of
Did we lose him? Gulam, I think we lost you. Technology. This is why you must pay attention to technology. Okay, I think we'll leave it there. Are there any questions online, Ken?
Thank you.
Have we all gone off? No, I'm here. Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good morning to you all. My name is Jonathan Tugume. I am a contractor. I run a company called Dynaco Limited, and we are into infrastructure, building bridges. It's very interesting. The last submission from Gulam is that infrastructure will give a good return for every dollar that we spend. But also earlier on, we learned that because of the squeeze, governments are going to spend less on infrastructure. Each of you can see that our own government is spending less on road maintenance, for example. And this is because a lot of the money is being used to take care of other priority areas like debt repayment. But we have also learned that much of the debt is because some of the infrastructure, like the oil roads that were done a few years ago, that debt is coming to maturity. And so we have to pay. So it's a cycle. Now, I'm a contractor, and we are stuck with a lot of unpaid money with the government. That unpaid money is actually money that is borrowed from the banks, from Stanbic. And now we have bridges and roads that cannot be crossed because they are very old, and also climate change. You know, floods are washing away bridges. You cannot go to northern Uganda because Karuma has got an advisory. Sezibwa on the eastern side of Uganda has an advisory. It's cut off. You cannot go to the west because Katonga is under construction. If we have any further emergencies, we are all in trouble. And I'm sure you also see in your neighborhoods, the roads are very bad because the road maintenance budget is under squeeze. So, what do we do? And these things we used to think were problems of engineers. Now, as I learned, they are problems of finance and economists like the guys in this room. You cause us the problems. Because if I cannot get access, for example, now to credit, because maybe the bank is feeling a bit uncomfortable, I have so much money unpaid, and so I can't do the next project. So, and I'm not being paid, and interest rates are going up. We are also having many of the local contractors closing shop. And I think you can see that on your non-performing loans. So, we are all connected. What can we do as a bank, big bank like Stanbic? The regulator is here. What can you do to solve these problems? Especially if I do work and I'm a contractor and the work is certified, that means the government is enjoying the beneficial, use and benefits of my bridge, and they are driving over it, but I'm not paid. What can you do to get, because I see all the time you buy government instruments. You're willing to buy government of Uganda bond, but you cannot buy the debt related to a bridge that has been built. I think there's a disconnect. And eventually, jobs are being lost, employment is being killed, contractors who could actually help you in future to deal with the debt burden, because after all this, I finish now. After all this infrastructure is neglected for a long time, about 5 years from now, you will rush to borrow more money from the East because the contractors will come with contractor-facilitated finance. So let's see what we can do with what we have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
This was a question, and it's also an ESG. So both of you could come in.
Thank you so much. I think on the last part about how banks can look to support at the type of development work that you're doing, even borrowing from Gulam's illustration on the return on any dollar invested in infrastructure, I think that we will allow Dr. Mugume to sort of comment on the cost of borrowing that has sort of come down, but also from a bank perspective, and some of my colleagues could help me on this, we are having conversations around how we can discount some of the work that you've actually already done, even as we wait for government to come through with payments. As it is, we must remain partners of the government. So we are having conversations, and it's something that we can further with you to discount some of the work that you've actually already done. Maybe Dr. Mugume can round it up on the cost of debt generally, highlighting recent CBR cuts and the like.
Yes, you're absolutely right that the cost of money, the lending interest rates have been one of the structural impediments in Uganda. Actually, now we are talking about, now the average lending interest rate is around 17, weighted around 17.4 there. But traditionally it has been above 20. So, or at least we have seen a gradual movement downwards. Leave alone the easing of monetary policy, but some of the causes of high lending interest rates are really structural. A structure in nature, like, for example, the legal perspective. If you take a case for arbitration, how long does it take to get resolved? Those are many years down the road. Then you have government that comes to borrow from the same market at say 16%. So if you're a contractor and the government is borrowing at 16, and the governments live forever, but for you, you have a short lifespan. So the question is, so the free rate plus a premium of the fact that your company can go under, so you are charged 20%. So basically, so if the government borrowing also comes down, the premium, even if it remains, at least the lending interest rates have come down. So overall, I think lending interest rate is both structural in nature, but also monetary policy, and we agree that some of the efforts we are taking in terms of easing monetary policy will filter through into lending interest rates.
Thank you so much. I think we've come, okay, we'll take one more.
It's still morning, yes. Good morning. My name is Rosa Malango. I'm the chairperson of the Tumaini African Knowledge Center, which I recently founded. And part of my focus is on mobilizing high net worth partners with their own technology to bring their technology and bring 250 million into the economy. The second one is on integrated industrial platforms. Now, first, I want to say thank you, Stanbic. This is a very timely discussion as we try to mobilize more investment into the country. And as a country, I believe, is discussing its next development plan, I think. There were two things that I wanted to hear from the panelists, which I was not sure if I caught. The first one was on the workforce, because I hear there's a new technology. We understand the geopolitical shifts. We understand we have to figure out how to do both energies. I hear you, I agree on that. But how do we redefine the workforce that we need so that as we're creating these opportunities and bringing these jobs online, it will actually be the young Ugandans who get employed going forward. And we don't continue to have unemployment high, despite the fact that some of us are bringing in FDI. So your views on redefining the workforce and any impact on industrial policy would be really appreciated. The second thing that I wanted to hear a bit more is your views on the impact of technology on the manufacturing and service sectors in Uganda. Uganda is trying to position itself as the MICE hub, even though I know Kenya is also trying to do that. But with new technologies coming in, both done indigenously by our youth, but also being brought in by FDI, where are we on it? How do you see that playing a role in terms of the GDP that we need to generate in the next decade? Thank you.
Thanks. Josephine, do you want to take the question on workforce?
Yes, I will, and I will probably borrow from experience that I had. I had the good fortune to work for an engine manufacturer called Cummins in Nigeria, and together with my team, we actually championed an initiative around setting up a TVET with other companies such as Siemens. So what we did is we recognized that the readiness of the workforce and sort of the curriculum that was in place was not in sync with what we needed. And basically, again, coming from your side, investors, including ourselves, even the ones that are already in place, we actually have a responsibility to work with the education sector in really informing that curriculum so that it actually comes out to be relevant for what we need. So specifically, one of the things that Cummins did was it shipped actually engines from other areas in the world into Nigeria. And those engines were, used engines, but really to really support the technical institutions so that the students were aware in their curriculum about the type of tools and sort of skills they needed to equip themselves with. And then obviously the other piece was around training the trainers. We did that with our Johannesburg office at the time. So in a nutshell, it has to be a partnership between industry or investors together with the ministry, because ultimately the curriculum has to be informed. And if you're moving very fast on the other side, you really have to work with them to support that aspect. So I think it's just really, a lot of proactive initiative and investment.
I don't know if that's satisfactory, but I agree with you. We need to pay some focus to our education system. If there being no other questions.
Hello. So we're wrapping up the Q&A, and we have one question online for Chris. It says, does China's increased investment in Africa pose several risks? How can countries in East Africa ensure that these investments are sustainable in the long term? And how can we minimize the likely negative effects of increased China investment, like economic dependence, corruption, governance, political influence, and debt dependence?
To my mind, I think it goes back to, Ghulam's presentation where he talked about investing in institutional reform. I believe that will be one way that we can address that influence that China is making towards East Africa. And the reason why I say that, while I think government policy will decide whether they want to face east or west, but when you have strong institutions, you'll be able to limit any undue influence. I think we do need, our region does need investment from the east and also from the west. But investment in human capital, investment in attracting capital into our economies, and also strengthening institutions, I think over time will address I think that the question that was posed. I believe that strong institutions should help to ensure that we have steady and stable growth over a long period of time.
Thank you, Adam. I think we will close it here. I'd like to give my special thanks to our dear panelists and to Ghulam, who is online. I know that there's still a number of questions coming through, but our commitment and our ask of your time was only up to 11 o'clock. So I'm going to ask that we close here. We will continue the conversation and the questions online, and a number of us are in the room to support with any other questions that you might have. So thank you for now, and a very good rest of your day.
Very hearty congratulations to our panelists, Chris, Jocelyn, and Dr. Mgume, and our moderator, Daisy. We much appreciate. I believe we've had a very nice deliberation. I just request one more round of applause for them, because they've done a very good job.
NBS happening now.